This chapter discusses various techniques that you can use to look up a value in a range of data. Excel has 3 functions designed for this task, but you may find that these functions don't quite cut it. So we can use alternate techniques using functions like match, index, and offset. A lookup formula essentially returns a value from a table by looking up another related value. A common telephone directory provides a good example. If you want to look up a person's telephone number, you first locate the name and then retrieve the corresponding number. These are the functions that are used in lookup formulas. We will look at these in detail. First, we look at the VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function searches for a value in the first column of a range or lookup table and returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. The lookup table is arranged vertically. The VLOOKUP function has 4 arguments. The first argument is the value that needs to be looked up. The second is the range. Third is the column number from which a matching number is returned. And fourth is true or false depending on what sort of match you want returned. Now let us look at an example. As we had seen, there are 2 ways, exact match and approximate match. Suppose we want to determine the English marks for a student Ida James. We use the VLOOKUP function as shown. So first we look up the value Ida James in the range as shown by the box there, and then column number 2 because the English column is column number 2, and we say false because we want an exact match. As you can see, it has retrieved the number 45. Similarly, it can also be retrieved for math simply by changing the column number from 2 to 3. Next, we look at how to get an approximate match. So here we are determining the grades for corresponding marks from the lookup table on the right. So here what happens is, if there is no exact match, the VLOOKUP function returns the value corresponding to the number which is the greatest but smaller than the reference value. Since we will be dragging this for 3 columns and the 10 rows, we are putting a $sign before the range to keep it constant. As you can see, the grades have been assigned for every mark for every student. A useful tip: if the range lookup argument is true or omitted, the first column of the lookup table must be in ascending order. Next, we will look at the HLOOKUP function. The HLOOKUP function searches for a value in the first row of a range and returns a value in the same column from a row that is specified. This is very much similar to the VLOOKUP function, except that the lookup table is arranged horizontally. So we will look at an example for an approximate match using the HLOOKUP function. It is very much similar to the example we saw before, except that the table is arranged horizontally. As you can see, the lookup value, the range, and the horizontal row has been specified. Now if you change the lookup value, you can see that the grade is automatically changing. Next, we look at the lookup function. The lookup function looks in a 1 row or a 1 column range for a value and returns a value for the same position in a second 1 row or 1 column range. So it has 3 arguments: the value that needs to be looked up, a 1 row or 1 column range from where the value needs to be looked up, and a 1 row or 1 column range from where the value needs to be returned. So we will consider the same example we saw for the VLOOKUP function. We are trying to extract the English marks for the student Ida James. So as you can see, the first vector is the student name and the second vector is the English column. When using the lookup function, the lookup vector must be in the ascending order. Now we look at the match function. The match function returns a relative position of a cell in a range that matches the specified value. It takes 3 arguments. The first argument is the value that needs to be matched. The second is the range within which it's being searched. And third is an integer. It can be -1, 0 or 1. -1 finds the smallest value greater than or equal to the lookup value. 0 finds an exact match. And 1 finds the greatest value smaller than or equal to the lookup value. Now let us look at an example. Again, we look at the same example used for the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP function. So here we are trying to determine which roll number does Ida James come under. So as you can see, it returns 5. Now we look at the index function. The index function returns a cell from a range. It takes 3 arguments. The first is the range or array from which you're going to search. Second is the row number, and third is the column number. So suppose we want to extract the number 55, that is the math marks for Ida James. We say index of your range, comma, the 5th row and the 3rd column. So 5, comma 3. As you can see, it returns 55. The Excel lookup function treats empty cells as zeros. Finally, we look at the offset function. The offset function returns a reference to a range, that is a specified number of rows and columns from a cell or a range of cells. It takes 5 arguments. The final 2 arguments are optional. The first argument is the reference cell. Second is the number of rows above or below the reference. The third is the number of columns left or right. And the fourth and fifth argument specify the range that is going to be returned. Here we are taking the reference cell as 84, and by saying 3 we are moving 3 rows below, and minus 2 we are moving 2 columns to the left, and as you can see the range is 1, 1, so it returns a single cell. Returned value is rider stems. Now let us look at some specialized lookup formulas. The VLOOKUP function always looks up a value in the first column of the lookup range. But what if you want to look up a value in a column other than the first column? One solution is to use the lookup function, which requires 2 range arguments. But the lookup function poses some problems. It requires that the range be in an ascending order, and second, if there is a non-existent layer, it returns an erroneous result. The second option is to use the index and match functions. Suppose we want to determine which class a particular student is from. So basically we are looking at the column name and then retrieving the value from the class on the left hand side of the column. So we use the lookup function, and here the reference range is name while the retrieving range is class. This can also be done by using the match and index functions as shown. So here match basically returns the relative position of the name rider stems, and this is used in turn in the index function to return the class 4. Next we will see how to look up values from multiple lookup tables. So here we will be using the if function. In this example, we are looking at how a company decides how it awards reward points to its customers. As you can see, there are 2 parameters. Here is the member and total purchase, and 2 lookup tables. Here we use the VLOOKUP function in coordination with the if function to look up 2 columns. So the first argument is the reference value, that is the total purchase, and we use the if function to choose the tables. And here the column from which the value has to be returned is 2. And we put a $sign before the range because we are going to drag the formula for the entire column. Next we will see how to perform a two-way lookup. Suppose you need to extract a value that needs to be looked up with 2 references. You can use a combination of match and index. There are 2 ways. First is it can be a row and a column reference, or it can be 2 column reference. In this example, suppose we need to determine the sales of Ida in month May. First we use the match function to determine the offset of name and month. Next, we use the index function and determine the value with the offset as the arguments. As you can see, the value returned is 67. Next, we see an example of how to look up values with two column references. Suppose you need a representative from class 5A. First, we concatenate both the strings in the two columns in a separate column and then use the index function to extract the value. As you can see, the representative for 5A is Oliver Pinto. This concludes the chapter on lookup functions.